Welcome back, everyone. Today, we will start our Halloween stuff. I know it's a couple weeks early into September, but I just didn't have anything that could do like a two-parter story. But I do have this book from Stephen King called Everything's Eventual, which has several different short stories put into one. So that is perfect for things like this, where I just need to fill some space. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. We're going to read the back of the book, and then I'm going to read the introduction. And depending on time, depends on whether or not I go ahead and start the new story or not, because the introduction is very long. So let's do this. Compelling, brilliantly creepy. USA Today. Internationally best-selling author Stephen King is in terrifying top form with his first collection of short stories in almost a decade. In this spine-chilling compilation, King takes readers down a road less traveled, for good reason. In the blockbuster ebook, Riding the Bullet, bad table service turns bloody when you stop in for lunch at the Gotham Cafe, and terror becomes deja vu all over again when you get that feeling you can only say what it is in French. Along with 11 more stories that will keep you awake until daybreak, enter a nightmarish mindscape of unrelenting horror and shocking revelations that could only come from the imagination of the greatest storyteller of our time. Well-crafted, nuanced stories, The Washington Post. Stephen King is the author of more than 50 books, all of them worldwide bestsellers. Among his most recent are Dreamcatcher, Hearts in Atlantis, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, Bag of Bones, the screenplay Storm of the Century, and The Green Mile. His acclaimed nonfiction book, On Writing, was also a bestseller. He lives in Bangor, Maine, with his wife, novelist Tabitha King. Now this that might be all old information, due to how old this book is. Let me see if I can find a copyright. This book was published in 2003. Originally published in 2002. This is for Shane Leonard. Contents. What I did was take all of the spades out of a deck of cards plus a joker. Ace to king equals 1 through 13. Joker equals 14. I shuffled the cards and dealt them. The order in which they came out of the deck became the order of the stories, based on their position in the list my publisher sent me. And it actually created a very nice balance between the literary stories and the all-out screamers. I also added an explanatory note before or after each story, depending on which seemed the more fitting position. Next collection, selected by Tarot. Introduction. Practicing the almost lost art. This is from King's perspective. I've written more than once about the joy of writing and see no need to reheat that particular skillet of hash at this late date. But here's a confession. I also take an amateur, slightly crazed pleasure in the business side of what I do. I like to goof wit it. Do a little media cross-pollination and envelope pushing. I've tried doing visual novels, Storm of the Century, Red Rose, serial novels, The Green Mile, and serial novels on the internet, The Plant. It's not about making more money or even precisely about creating new markets. It's about trying to see the act art and craft of writing in different ways, thereby refreshing the process and keeping the result artifacts, the stories, in other words, as bright as possible. I started to write, keeping the stories new, in the line above, then deleted the phrase in the interest of honesty. I mean, come on here, ladies and gentlemen. Whom can I possibly kid at this late date except maybe myself? I sold my first story when I was 21 and a junior in college. I'm now 54 and have run a lot of language through the 2.2-pound organic computer word processor. I hang my Red Sox cap on and have run a lot of language through the 2.2-pound organic computer word processor I hang my Red Sox cap on. The act of writing stories hasn't been new for me in a long time, and that doesn't mean it's lost its fascination. If I don't find ways of keeping it fresh and interesting, though, it'll get old and tired in a hurry. I don't want that to happen, because I don't want to cheat the people who read my stuff. That would be you, dear constant reader. And I don't want to cheat myself either. We're in it together, after all. This is a date we're on. We should have fun. We should dance. So, keeping that in mind, here's yet another story. My wife and I own these two radio stations, okay? WZON-AM, which is sports radio, and WKIT-FM, which is classic rock. The rock of Bangor, we say. Classic rock radio is a tough business these days, especially in a market like Bangor, where there are too many stations and not enough listeners. We've got contemporary, country, classic country, oldies, classic oldies, Rush Limbaugh, Paul Harvey, and Casey Kasem. The Steve and Tabby King stations ran in the red for a lot of years. Not deep in the red, but far enough to bug me. I like to be a winner, you see. And while we were winning in the ARBs, that would be the Arbitron ratings, which are to radio what the Nielsen's are to TV. We kept coming up short on the bottom line at the end of the year. It was explained to me that there just wasn't enough ad revenue in the Bangor market, that the pie had been cut into too many slices. So I had an idea. I'd write a radio play, I thought, sort of like the ones I used to listen to with my grandfather when I was growing up. And he was growing old. In Durham, Maine, a Halloween play. By God! I knew about Orson Welles' famous, or infamous, Halloween adaptation of The War of the Worlds on the Mercury Theater, of course. It was Welles's conceit, his absolutely brilliant conceit, to do H.G. Wells's classic invasion story as a series of news bulletins and reports. It worked, too. It worked so well that it sparked a national panic, and Welles, Orson, not H.G., had to make a public apology on the following week's Mercury Theater. I bet he made it with a smile on his face. I know I'd be smiling if I were ever to come up with a lie so powerful and persuasive. I thought what had worked for Orson Welles would work for me. Instead of starting with dance band music, as the Welles adaptation did, mine would start with Ted Nugent wailing on Catch Scratch Fever. Then an announcer breaks in, one of our actual WKIT air personalities. Nobody calls them DJs anymore. "This is JJ West, WKIT News," he says. "I'm in downtown Bangor, where roughly 1,000 people are jammed into Pickering Square, watching as a large, silvery disc-like object descends towards the ground. Wait a minute. If I raise the mic, perhaps you can hear it." And just like that, we'd be off to the races. I could use our very own in-house production facilities to create the audio effects, local community theater actors to do the roles, and the best part? The very best part of it all? We could record the result and syndicate syndicate it to stations all over the country. The resulting income, I figured, and my accountant agreed, would be radio station income instead of creative writing income. It was a way to get around the advertising revenue shortfall, and at the end of the year, the radio stations might actually be in the black. The idea for the radio play was exciting, and the prospect of helping my stations into a profit position with my skills as a writer for hire was also exciting. So what happened? I couldn't do it. That's what happened. I tried, and everything I wrote came out sounding like narration, not a play. The sort of thing that you see unspooling in your mind. Those old enough to remember such radio programs as Suspense and Gunsmoke will know what I mean. But something more like a book on tape. I'm sure we still could have gone the syndication route and made some money, but I knew the play would not be a success. It was boring. It would cheat the listener. It was busted, and I didn't know how to fix it. Writing radio plays, it seems to me, is a lost art. We have lost the ability to see with our ears, although we had it once. I remember listening to some radio foley guy taping a hollow block of wood with his knuckles, and seeing Matt Dillon walking to the bar of the Long Branch Saloon in his dusty boots, clear as day. No more. Those days are gone. Playwriting in the Shakespearean style, comedy and tragedy that works itself out in blank verse, is another lost art. Folks still go to see college productions of Hamlet and King Lear, but let's be honest with ourselves. How do you think one of those plays would do on TV against Weakest Link or Survivor 5 Stranded on the Moon? Even if you could get Brad Pitt to play Hamlet and Jack Nicholson to do Polonius, and although folks still go to such Elizabethan extravaganzas as King Lear or Macbeth, the enjoyment of an art form is light years from the ability to create a new example of that art form. Every now and then, someone tries mounting a black verse production either on Broadway or off it. They inevitably fail. Poetry is not a lost art. Poetry is better than ever. Of course, you've got the usual gang of idiots, as the Mad magazine staff writers used to call themselves, hiding in the thickets. Folks who have gotten petitioned and genius all confused. Pretension and genius all confused. But there are also many brilliant practitioners of the art out there. Check the literary magazines at your local bookstore, if you don't believe me. For every 6 crappy poems you read, you'll actually find 1 or 2 good ones, and that, believe me, is a very acceptable ratio of trash to treasure. The short story is also not a lost art, but I would argue it is a good deal closer than poetry to the lip of the drop into extinction's pit. When I sold my first short story in the delightfully antique year of 1968, I was already bemoaning the steady attrition of markets. The pulps were gone, the digests were going, the weeklies, such as the Saturday Evening Post, were dying. In the years since, I have seen the markets for short stories continue to shrink. God bless the little magazines, where young writers can still publish their stories for contributor copies, and God bless the editors who still read the contents of their slush piles, especially in the wake of 2001's anthrax scare. And God bless the publishers who still greenlight the occasional anthology of original stories, but God won't have to spend his whole day or even his coffee break blessing those people. 10 or 15 minutes would do the trick. Their number is small, and every year there are 1 or 2 fewer. Story Magazine, a lodestar for young writers, including myself, although I never actually published there, is now gone. Amazing Stories is gone, despite repeated efforts to revive it. Interesting science fiction magazines such as Vertex are gone. And, of course, the horror mags like Creepy and Eerie, those wonderful periodicals, are long gone. Every now and then, someone will try to revive one of these magazines. As I write this, Weird Tales is staggering through such a revival. Mostly they fail. It's like those plays in blank verse, the ones that open and then close in what seems to be no more than the wink of an eye. When it's gone, you can't bring it back. What's lost has a way of staying lost. I've continued to write short stories over the years, partly because the ideas still come from time to time, beautifully compressed ideas that cry out for 3,000 words, maybe 9,000, 15,000 at the very most, and partly because it's the way I affirm, at least to myself, the fact that I haven't sold out, no matter what the more unkind critics may think. Short stories are still piecework, the equivalent of those one-of-a-kind items you can buy in an artisan shop. If, that is, you are willing to be patient and wait while it's made by hand in the back room. But there's no reason for stories to be marketed by the same old just like father did it methods, simply because the stories themselves are created that way. Nor is there any reason to assume, as so many stogies in the critical press seem to have done, that the way in which a piece of fiction is sold must in some way contaminate or cheapen the product itself. I'm speaking here of writing the bullet, which has surely been my oddest experience of selling my wares in the marketplace, in a story which illustrates the main points I'm trying to make. That what's lost cannot be easily retrieved, that once things go past a certain point, extinction is probably inevitable, but that a fresh perspective on one aspect of creative writing, the commercial aspect, can sometimes refresh the whole. Bullet was composed after on-writing, and while I was still recuperating from an accident which left me in a state of nearly constant physical misery, writing took me away from the worst of that pain. It was, and continues to be, the best painkiller in my limited arsenal. The story I wanted to tell was simplicity itself, little more than a campfire ghost story, really. It was the hitchhiker who got picked up by a dead man. While I was writing away at my story in the unreal world of my imagination, a .com bubble was growing in the equally unreal world of e-commerce. One aspect of this was the so-called electronic book, which, according to some, would spell the end of books as we'd always known them, objects of glue and binding, pages you turned by hand, and which sometimes fell out if the glue was weak or the binding old. In early 2000, there was great interest in an essay by Arthur C. Clarke, which had been published only in cyberspace. It was extremely short, though, like kissing your sister, it was what I thought when I first read it. My story, when it was done, was quite long. Susan Moldo, my editor at Scribbler, as an X-Files fan, I call her Agent Moldo. You work it out. Called one day, prompted by Ralph Vicinanza, and asked if I had anything I'd like to try in the electronic marketplace. I sent her Bullet, and the three of us, Susan, Scribner, and I, made a little bit of publishing history. Several 100,000 people downloaded the story, and I ended up making an embarrassing amount of money. Except that's a fucking lie. I wasn't embarrassed a bit. Even the audio rights went for over $100,000, a comically huge piece. Am I bragging here? Boasting my narrow white boy ass off? In a way I am. But I'm also here to tell you that writing the Bullet made me absolutely crazy. Usually, If I'm in one of those fancy schmancy airport lounges, I'm ignored by the rest of the clientele. They're busy babbling into phones or making deals at the bar, which is fine with me. Every now and then, one of them will drop by and ask me to sign a cocktail napkin for the wife. The wife, these handsomely suited briefcase-toting fellows usually want me to know, has read all my books. They, on the other hand, have read none. They want me to know that too. Just too busy. Read The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Read Who Moved My Cheese. Read The Prayer of Jabez. And that's pretty much it. Gotta hurry, gotta rush. I got a heart attack due in about 4 years, and I want to be sure that I'm there to meet it with my 401k all in order when it shows up. After Bullet was published as an ebook, cover, Scribner, colophon, and all, that changed. I was mobbed in the airport lounges. I was even mobbed in the Boston Amtrak lounge. I was buttonholed on the street. For a little while there, I was turning down the chance to appear on a giddy three talk shows a day. I was holding out for Springer, but Jerry never called. I even got on the cover of Time and the New York Times. Pontificated at some length over the perceived success of writing The Bullet and the perceived failure of its cyber successor, The Plant. Dear God, I was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I had inadvertently become a mogul. And what was driving me crazy? What made it all seem so pointless? Why, that nobody cared about the story. Hell, nobody even asked about the story. And do you know what? It's a pretty good story, if I do say so myself. Simple but fun. Gets the job done. If it got you to turn off the TV, as far as I'm concerned, it, or any of the stories in the collection which follows, is a total success. But in the wake of Bullet, all the guys in ties wanted to know was, how's it doing? How's it selling? How do you tell them I didn't give a flying fuck how it was doing in the marketplace? That what I cared about was how it was doing in the reader's heart. Was it succeeding there? Failing? Getting through to the nerve endings? Causing that little frisson which is the spooky story's raison d'etre? I gradually realized that I was seeing another example of creative ebb, another step by another art on the road that may indeed end in extinction. There is something weirdly decadent about appearing on the cover of a major magazine simply because you used an alternate route into the marketplace. There is something weirder about realizing that all those readers might have been a lot more interested in the novelty of the electronic package than they were in what was inside the package. Do I want to know how many of the readers who downloaded Writing the Bullet actually read Writing the Bullet? I do not. I think I might be extremely disappointed. E-publishing may or may not be the wave of the future. About that, I care not a fiddler's fart, believe me. For me, going that route was simply another way of trying to keep myself fully involved in the process of writing stories, and then getting them to as many people as possible. This book will probably end up on the bestseller list for a while. I've been very lucky that way, but if you see it there, you might ask yourself how many other books of short stories end up on the bestseller lists in the course of any given year, and how long publishers can be expected to publish books of a type that doesn't interest readers very much. Yet for me, there are few pleasures so excellent as sitting in my favorite chair on a cold night with a hot cup of tea, listening to the wind outside and reading a good story, which I can complete in a single sitting. Writing them is not so pleasurable. I can only think of two in the current collection, the title story, and LT's Theory of Pets, which were written without an amount of effort far greater than the relatively slight result. And yet I think I have succeeded in keeping my craft new, at least to myself, mostly because I refuse to let a year go by without writing at least one or two of them, not for money, not even precisely for love, but as a kind of dues paying. Because if you want to write short stories, you have to do more than think about writing short stories. It is not like riding a bicycle, but more like working out in the gym. Your choice is use it or lose it. To see them collected here like this is a great pleasure for me. I hope it will be for you as well. You can let me know at www.stephenking.com, and you can do something else for me and yourself as well. If these stories work for you, buy another collection, Sam the Cat by Matthew Clam, for instance, or The Hotel Eden by Ron Carlson. These are only two of the good writers doing good work out there, and although it's now officially the 21st century, they're doing it in the same old way, one word at a time. The format in which they eventually appear doesn't change that. If you care, support them. The best method of support really hasn't changed much. Read their stories. I'd like to thank a few people who've read mine. Bill Buford at The New Yorker, Susan Moldo at Scribner, Chuck Verrill, who has edited so much of my work across such a span of years, Ralph Vicinaza, Arthur Green, Gordon Van Gelder, and Ed Furman at the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Nye Wilden at Cavalier, and the late Robert A.W. Lowndes, who bought that first short story back in '68. Also, most important, my wife, Tabitha, who remains my favorite constant reader. These are all people who have worked and are still working to keep the short story from becoming a lost art. So am I. And by what you buy and thus choose to subsidize, and by what you read, so are you. You most of all, constant reader, always you. Stephen King, Bangor, Maine, December 11th, 2001. And that's just the introduction. So now we're going to open into the actual first short story, Autopsy Room 4. I don't know exactly how much I'm going to read because there isn't a chapter or anything in it. It's just 34 pages long. But I do want to read some of it today and see how far we can get. So just give me a second. All right. Autopsy Room 4. It's so dark that for a while, just how long I don't know, I think I'm still unconscious. Then, slowly, it comes to me that unconscious people don't have a sensation of movement through the dark, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic sound that can only be a squeaky wheel. And I can feel contact from the top of my head to the balls of my heels. I can smell something that might be rubber or vinyl. This is not unconsciousness, and there is something too rational about these sensations for it to be a dream. Then what is it? Who am I? And what's happening to me? The squeaky wheel quits its stupid rhythm, and I stop moving. There is a crackle around me from the rubber-smelling stuff. A voice. Which one did they say? A pause. Second voice. 4, I think. Yeah, 4. We start to move again, but more slowly. I can hear the faint scuff of feet now, probably in soft-soled shoes, maybe sneakers. The owners of the voices are the owners of the shoes. They stop me again. There's a thump followed by a faint whoosh. It is, I think, the sound of a door with a pneumatic hinge being opened. What's going on here? I yell, but the yell is only in my head. My lips don't move. I can feel them, and my tongue, lying on the floor of my mouth like a stunned mole, but I can't move them. The thing I'm on starts rolling again. A moving bed? Yes. A gurney, in other words. I've had some experience with them a long time ago. In Lyndon Johnson's shitty little Asian adventure. It comes to me that I'm in a hospital, that something bad has happened to me. Something like the explosion that almost neutered me 23 years before, and that I'm going to be operated on. There are a lot of answers in that idea, sensible ones, for the most part, but I don't hurt anywhere. Except for the minor matter of being scared out of my wits, I feel fine. And if these are orderlies wheeling me into an operating room, why can't I see? Why can't I talk? A third voice. Over here, boys. My rolling bed is pushed in a new direction, and the question drumming in my head is, what kind of a mess have I gotten myself into? Doesn't that depend on who you are? I ask myself. But that's one thing, at least. I find I do know. I'm Howard Cottrell. I'm a stockbroker known to some of my colleagues as Howard the Conqueror. Second voice from just above my head. You're looking very pretty today, Doc. Fourth voice, female and cool. It's always nice to be validated by you, Rusty. Could you hurry up a little? The babysitter expects me back by 7. She's committed to dinner with her parents. Back by 7. It's still the afternoon, maybe, or early evening. But black in here. Black as your hat. Black as a woodchuck's asshole. Black as midnight in Persia. And what's going on? Where have I been? What have I been doing? Why haven't I been manning the phones? Because it's Saturday, a voice from far down murmurs. You were... A sound. Walk! A sound I love. A sound I more or less live for. The sound of what? The head of a golf club, of course. Hitting a ball off the tee. I stand watching it fly off into the blue. I'm grabbed shoulders and calves and lifted. It startles me terribly, and I try to scream. No sound comes out. Or perhaps one does. A tiny squeak. Much tinier than the one produced by the wheel below me. Probably not even that. Probably it's just my imagination. I'm swung through the air in an envelope of blackness. Hey, don't drop me! I've got a bad back, I try to say. And again, there's no movement of the lips or teeth. My tongue goes on lying on the floor of my mouth. The mole maybe not just stunned but dead. And now I have a terrible thought. One which spikes fright a degree closer to panic. What if they put me down the wrong way and my tongue slides backwards and blocks my windpipe? I won't be able to breathe. That's what people mean when they say someone swallowed his tongue, isn't it? Second voice, Rusty. You'll like this one, Doc. He looks like Michael Bolton. Female Doc. Who's that? Third Doc. A third voice. Sounds like a young man, not much more than a teenager. He's this white lounge singer who wants to be black. I don't think it's that this is him. There's laughter at that. The female voice joining in a little doubtfully. And as I am set down on what feels like a padded table, Rusty starts some new crack. He's got a whole stand-up routine, it seems. I lose this bit of hilarity in a burst of sudden horror. I won't be able to breathe if my tongue blocks my windpipe. That's the thought which has just gone through my mind. But what if I'm not breathing now? What if I'm dead? What if this is what death is like? It fits. It fits everything with a horrid prophylactic snugness. The dark, The rubbery smell. Nowadays I am Howard the Conqueror, stockbroker extraordinaire, terror of Derry Municipal Country Club, frequent habitué of what is known at golf courses all over the world as the 19th hole. But in 71, I was part of a medical assistance team in the Mekong Delta, a scared kid who sometimes woke up wet-eyed from dreams of the family dog, and all at once I know this feel, this smell. Dear God, I'm in a body bag. First voice. Want to sign this, Doc? Remember to bear down hard. It's three copies. Sound of a pen scraping away on paper. I imagine the owner of the first voice holding out a clipboard to the woman doctor. Oh, dear Jesus, let me not be dead. I try to scream and nothing comes out. I'm breathing, though, aren't I? I mean, I can't feel myself doing it, but my lungs seem okay. They're not throbbing or yelling for air the way they do when you've swum too far underwater, so I must be okay, right? Except if you're dead, the deep voice murmurs. They wouldn't be crying out for air, would they? No, because dead lungs don't need to breathe. Dead lungs can just kind of take it easy. Rusty. What are you doing next Saturday night, Doc? But if I'm dead, how can I feel? How can I smell the bag I'm in? How can I hear these voices? The doc now saying that next Saturday night she's going to be shampooing her dog, which is named Rusty. What a coincidence. And all of them laughing? If I'm dead, why aren't I either gone or in the white light they're always talking about on Oprah? There's a harsh, ripping sound, and all at once I am in white light. It is blinding, like the sun breaking through a scrim of clouds on a winter day. I try to squint my eyes shut against it, but nothing happens. My eyelids are like blinds on broken rollers. A face bends over me, blocking off part of the glare, which comes not from some dazzling astral plane, but from a bank of overhead fluorescence. The face belongs to a young, conventionally handsome man of about 25. He looks like one of those beach beefcakes on Baywatch or Melrose Place. Marginally smarter, though. He's got a lot of dark black hair under a carelessly worn surgical greens cap. He's wearing the tunic, too. His eyes are cobalt blue, the sort of eyes girls reputably die for. There are dusty arcs of freckles high up on his cheekbones. Hey, gosh, he says. It's the third voice. This guy does look like Michael Bolton. A little long in the old tootharoo, maybe. He leans closer. One of the flat tie ribbons at the neck of his greens tunic tickles against my forehead. But yeah, I see it. Hey, Michael, sing something. Help me, is what I'm trying to sing. But I can only look up into his dark blue eyes with my frozen dead man stare. I can only wonder if I am a dead man. If this is how it happens, if this is what everyone goes through after the pump quits, if I'm still alive, how come he hasn't seen my pupils contract when the light hit them? But I know the answer to that, or I think I do. They didn't contract. That's why the glare from the fluorescence is so painful. The tie tickling across my forehead like a feather. Help me! I scream up at the Baywatch beefcake, who is probably an intern or maybe just a med school brat. Help me, please! My lips don't even quiver. The face moves back. The tie stops tickling, and all that white light streams through my helpless to look away eyes and into my brain. It's a hellish feeling. A kind of rape. I'll go blind if I have to stare into that for long, I think. And blindness will be a relief. Whack! The sound of the driver hitting the ball, but a little flat this time, and the feeling in the hands is bad. The ball's up, but veering off, veering toward... Shit. I'm in the rough. Now another face bends into my field of vision, a white tunic instead of a green one below it. A great, untidy mop of orange hair above it. Distress sale IQ is my first impression. It can only be Rusty. He's wearing a big, dumb grin that I think of as a high school grin. The grin of a kid who should have a tattoo reading, "Born to snap bra straps," on one wasted bicep. "Michael," Rusty exclaims. "Geez, you're looking good. This is an honor. Sing for us, big boy. Sing your dead ass off." From somewhere behind me comes the doc's voice, cool, no longer even pretending to be amused by these antics. "Quit it, Rusty." Then in a slightly new direction. "What's the story, Mike?" Mike's voice is the first voice, Rusty's partner. He sounds slightly embarrassed to be working with a guy who wants to be Andrew Dice Clay when he grows up. "Found him on the 14th hole at Derry Mooney. Off the course, actually in the rough. If he hadn't just played through the foursome behind him, and if they hadn't seen one of his legs sticking out of the pucker brush, he'd be an ant farm by now." I hear that sound in my head again. Whack! Only this time it is followed by another, far less pleasant sound, the rustle of underbrush as I sweep it with the head of my driver. It would have to be 14, where there is reputedly poison ivy, and Rusty is peering down at me, stupid and avid. It's not death that interests him. It's my resemblance to Michael Bolton. Oh yes, I know about it. Have not been above using it with certain female clients. Otherwise, it gets old in a hurry. And in these circumstances, God. "Attending physician?" the lady doc asks. "Was it Cazaline?" "No," Mike says. And for just a moment, he looks down at me. Older than Rusty by at least 10 years. Black hair with flecks of gray in it. Spectacles. How come none of these people can see that I am not dead? "There was a doc in the foursome that found him, actually. That's his signature on page 1, see?" Riffle of paper, then, "Christ, Jennings, I know him. He gave Noah his physical after the Ark grounded on Mount Ararat." Rusty doesn't look as if he gets the joke, but he brays laughter into my face anyway. I can smell onions on his breath, a little leftover lunch stink, and if I can smell onions, I must be breathing. I must be, right? If only... Before I can finish this thought, Rusty leans even closer and I feel a blast of hope. He's seen something. He's seen something and means to give me mouth to mouth. God bless you, Rusty. God bless you and your onion breath. But the stupid grin doesn't change, and instead of putting his mouth on mine, his hand slips around my jaw. Now he's grasping one side of his thumb and the other side with his fingers. "He's alive!" Krusty cries. "He's alive! And he's gonna sing for the Room 4 Michael Bolton for Room 4 Michael Bolton Fan Club." His fingers pinch tighter. It hurts in a distant coming out of the Novocaine way, and begin to move my jaw up and down, clicking my teeth together. "If she's bad, he can't see it," Rusty sings in a hideous, atonal voice that would probably make Percy Sledge's head explode. "She can do no wrong." My teeth open and close at the rough urging of his hand. My tongue rises and falls like a dead dog riding the surface of an uneasy waterbed. "Stop it," the lady doc snaps at him. She sounds genuinely shocked. Rusty, perhaps sensing this, does not stop, but goes gleefully on. His fingers are pinching into my cheeks now. My frozen eyes stare blindly upward. Turn his back on his best friend if she put him down. Then she's there, a woman in a green gown with her cap tied around her throat and hanging down her back like the Cisco Kid's sombrero. Short brown hair swept back from her brow. Looking good looking, but severe. More handsome than pretty. She grabs Rusty with one short-nailed hand and pulls him back from me. "Hey," Rusty says, indignant. "Get your hands off me." "Then you keep your hands off him," she says, and there is no mistaking the anger in her voice. "I'm tired of your sophomore class wit, Rusty, and the next time you start in, I'm going to report you." "Hey, let's all calm down," says the Baywatch hunk Doc's assistant. He sounds alarmed, as if he expects Rusty and his boss to start duking it out right here. "Let's just put a lid on it." "Why is she being such a bitch to me?" Rusty says. He's still trying to sound indignant, but he's actually whining now. Then, in a slightly different direction, "Why you being such a bitch? You on your period? Is that it?" Doc sounding disgusted. "Get him out of here." Mike. "Come on, Rusty. Let's go sign the log." Rusty. "Yeah, and get some fresh air." Me listening to all this like it was on the radio. Their feet squeaking toward the door. Rusty now all huffy and offended, asking her why she doesn't just wear a mood ring or something so people will know. Soft shoes squeaking on tile, and suddenly that sound is replaced by the sound of my driver beating the bush for my goddamn ball. Where is it? It didn't go too far in. I'm sure of it. So where is it? Jesus, I hate 14. Supposedly there's poison ivy, and with all this underbrush, there could easily be. And then something bit me, didn't it? Yes, I'm almost sure it did. On the left calf, just above the top of my white athletic sock, a red-hot, darning needle of pain, perfectly concentrated at first, then spreading, then darkness. Under the gurney, zipped up, snug inside a body bag and listening to Mike, which one did they say? And Rusty, 4, I think. Yeah, 4. I want to think it was some kind of snake, but maybe that's only because I was thinking about them while I hunted for my ball. It could have been an insect. I only recall the single line of pain, and after all, what does it matter? What matters here is that I'm alive, and they don't know it. It's incredible, but they don't know it. Of course I had bad luck. I know Dr. Jennings. Remember speaking to him as I played through his foursome on the 11th hole. A nice enough guy, but vague. An antique. The antique had pronounced me dead. Then Rusty, with his dopey green eyes and his detention hall grin, had pronounced me dead. The Lady Doc, Miss Cisco Kid, hadn't even looked at me yet. Not really. When she did, maybe. I hate that jerk, she says when the door is closed. Now it's just the three of us. Only, of course, Miss Cisco Kid thinks it's just the two of them. Why do I always get the jerks, Peter? I don't know, Mr. Melrose Place says. But Rusty's a special case. Even in the annals of famous jerks. Walking brain death. She laughs and something clanks. The clank is followed by a sound that scares me badly. Steel instruments clicking together. They are off to the left of me, and although I can't see them, I know what they're getting ready to do. The autopsy. They are getting ready to cut into me. They intend to remove Howard Cottrell's heart and see if it blew a piston or threw a rod. My leg, I scream inside my head. Look at my left leg. That's the trouble, not my heart. Perhaps my eyes have adjusted a little after all. Now I can see at the very top of my vision a stainless steel armature. It looks like a giant piece of dental equipment, except that thing at the end isn't a drill, it's a saw. From some place deep inside, where the brain stores the sort of trivia you only need if you happen to be playing Jeopardy on TV. I even come up with the name. It's a giggly saw. They use it to cut off the top of your skull. This is after they've pulled your face off like a kid's Halloween mask, of course. Hair and all. Then they take out your brain. Clink, clink, clink. A pause. Then a clank. So loud I'd jump if I were capable of jumping. Do you want to do the pericardial cut? She asks. Pete, cautious. Do you want me to? Dr. Sisko sounding pleasant, sounding like someone who is conferring a favor and a responsibility. Yes, I think so. All right, he says. You'll assist? Your trusty co-pilot, she says and laughs. She punctuates her laughter with a snick-snick sound. It's the sound of scissors cutting the air. Now panic beats and flutters inside my skull like a flock of starlings locked in an attic. The Nam was a long time ago, but I saw half a dozen field autopsies there. What the doctors used to call tent show post-mortems. And I know what Sisko and Poncho mean to do. The scissors have long, sharp blades, very sharp blades, and fat-fingered holes. Still, you have to be strong to use them. The lower blade slides into the gut like butter, then snip, up through the bundle of nerves at the solar plexus and into the beef jerky weave of muscle and tendon above it, then into the sternum. When the blades come together this time, they do so with a heavy crunch as the bone parts of the rib cage pops apart like a couple of barrels which have been lashed together with twine. Then on up with those scissors that look like nothing so much as the poultry shear supermarket butchers use. Snip, crunch, snip, crunch, snip, crunch, splitting bone and shearing muscle, freeing the lungs, heading for the trachea, turning Howard the Conqueror into a Thanksgiving dinner no one will eat. A thin, nagging whine. This does sound like a dentist drill. Pete, can I? Dr. Sisko actually sounding a bit maternal. No, these. Snick, snick, demonstrating for him. They can't do this, I think. They can't cut me up. I can feel. Why? He asks. Because that's the way I want it, she says, sounding a lot less maternal. When you're on your own, Petey boy, you can do what you want. But in Katie Arlen's autopsy room, you start off with the pericardial shears. Autopsy room. There. It's out. I want to be all over Goosebumps. But of course, nothing happens. My flesh remains smooth. Remember, Dr. Arlen says, but now she's actually lecturing, any fool can learn how to use a milking machine, but the hands-on procedure is always best. There is something vaguely suggestive in her tone. Okay, he says. They're going to do it. I have to make some kind of noise or movement, or they're really going to do it. If blood flows or jets up from the first punch of the scissors, they'll know something's wrong. But by then, it will be too late. Very likely. That first snip crunch will have happened, and my ribs will be laying against my upper arms, my heart pulsing frantically away under the fluorescence in its bloody glossy I concentrate everything on my chest. I push, or try to, and something happens. A sound. I make a sound. It's mostly inside my closed mouth, but I can also hear and feel it in my nose, a low hum. Concentrating, summoning every bit of effort, I do it again, and this time the sound is a little stronger, leaking out of my nostrils like cigarette smoke. It makes me think of an old Alfred Hitchcock TV program I saw a long, long time ago, where Joseph Cotton was paralyzed in a car crash and was finally able to let them know he was still alive by crying a single tear. And if nothing else, that minuscule mosquito whine of a sound has proved to myself that I'm alive, that I'm not just a spirit lingering inside the clay effigy of my own dead body. Focusing all my concentration, I can feel breath slipping through my nose and down my throat, replacing the breath I have now expended. And then I send it out again, working harder than I ever worked summers summers for the Lane Construction Company when I was a teenager, working harder than I have ever worked in my life, because now I'm working for my life, and they must hear me. Dear Jesus, they must. You want some music? The woman doctor asks. I've got Marty Stewart, Tony Bennett. He makes a despairing sound. I barely hear it, and take no immediate meaning from what she's saying, which is probably a mercy. All right, she says, laughing. I've also got the Rolling Stones. You? Me. I'm not quite as square as I look, Peter. I didn't mean, he sounds flustered. Listen to me, I scream inside my head as my frozen eyes stare up into the icy white light. Stop chattering like magpies and listen to me. I can feel more air trickling down my throat, and the idea occurs that whatever has happened to me may be starting to wear off, but it's only a faint blip on the screen of my thoughts. Maybe it is wearing off, but very soon, now recovery will cease to be an option for me. All my energy is bent toward making them hear me, and this time they will hear me. I know it. Stones, then, she says. Unless you want me to run out and get a Michael Bolton CD in honor of our first pericardial. Please, no, he cries, and they both laugh. The sound starts to come out, and it is louder this time. Not as loud as I'd hoped, but loud enough. Surely loud enough. They'll hear. They must. Then, just as I begin to force the sound out of my nose like some rapidly solidifying liquid, the room is filled with a blare of fuzz-tone guitar and Mick Jagger's voice bashing off the walls. Ah, no, it's only rock and roll, but I like it. Turn it down, Dr. Sisko yells, comically overshouting, and amid these noises, my own nasal sound, a desperate little humming through my nostrils, is no more audible than a whisper in a foundry. And that's where we're going to leave off today. And we will see you guys next week with the rest of Autopsy Room 4.